Hey guys! Welcome to episode 4 of Parliamentary California. And this is part 2 of episode 4 of Parliamentary California. That is all about creating a representative government. And as you remembered from the first part of episode 4 of Parliamentary California, I talked about why the top 2 jungle primary system should be repealed. And I went into a lot of my reasoning why I believe the top 2 jungle primary system should be repealed and replaced with something else. And this is what the second part will continue on. Part 2 is all about sharing my system that I intend to replace, to be my replacement for the top 2 jungle primary system. So this is Parliamentary California, episode 4, creating a representative government or alternative, part 2. So before I start sharing my replacement to the top 2 primary system, I want to do a quick recap of what I went over in part 1 of episode 4 of Parliamentary California and why the top 2 primary system should be repealed. For one, it favors the wealthy or the status quo. And this is in part because the one thing I talked about in part 1 of episode 4 of Parliamentary California is that it can lead to candidate prop-up. What I mean by that is that a candidate, a well-established candidate, can prop up another candidate because he believes that candidate would be a weaker candidate to go up against, so that he can have an easier general election win. And because of that in turn favors the wealthy or the status quo. And on top of that, it reduces the influence of or weakens third parties, because with these top 2 jungle primary systems, you have to be the top 2 vote getters, and it actually puts third parties and independent candidates at a disadvantage, in part because they have such small voter bases. And when they have a very small voter base, it makes it a lot harder for them to have a candidate in the general election. And on top of that, it's just simply too complicated for the voters, especially during the primary, because you can have 50 to 60 or even 100 candidates running in the primary, which in turn also leads to a lot of vote splitting. And we're seeing that right now in the 2026 California gubernatorial election, which is why there is a possibility where we could actually have 2 Republicans advancing to the general election for the governor's race of California, which could either be between Chad Bianco or Steve Hilton, all because the Democratic vote is split among different candidates, between Becerra, Steyer, Mahan, Porter, and so forth. And on top of that, top 2 primaries or even top 4 or top 5 jungle primaries take away political parties' right to nominate their candidates and to vote on a platform that they will sell to the voters in the general election. So to reiterate again, why top 2 primaries should be repealed. It favors the wealthy or status quo because it encourages candidate prop-up, so that the establishment has a weaker candidate so that the establishment has an easier time to win the general election. As well, it reduces the influence of or weakens third parties because third parties such as the Greens have a very small voter base. It's also too complicated for the voters, especially during the primary. And it also takes away political parties' rights to nominate their candidates and to vote on a platform that they will sell to the voters in the general election. Now, since you know my reasons for why I believe the top 2 primary system should be repealed, it's time to share my alternatives that will replace the top 2 primary system. And I propose 5 alternatives to the top 2 primary system. And I'll explore those 5 proposals right now. The first alternative proposal is state party conventions. Conventions are meetings where delegates of a political party meet in their state or local community to select and or nominate their candidates for office and to vote on policies that will be a part of their party's platform. Think the 2024 Republican National Convention, the 2024 Democratic National Convention, or the 2021 Virginia Republican Convention, where they nominated Glenn Youngkin to be their nominee as governor of Virginia. Conventions already play an important role in endorsing and nominating candidates. But the difference is that conventions in Parliamentary California will now be held at any time by the political parties before or in advance of the general election. But like every other electoral system, they all have their pros and cons. Party conventions are no different. They also have their strengths and weaknesses. The pros of party conventions. The party delegates are, for one of the pros is that party delegates are among the nation's most engaged citizens. Number 2, delegates can spend hours upon hours analyzing candidates' positions and attending issue forums before casting their votes. 3, protects all political parties' rights to associate and makes their nomination process private and secretive, which shields them from interference by the state or any other organization like the media or another political party. 4, it will empower voters to organize with other voters who have shared values and interests to be united in advancing a common goal. Party conventions allow voters to make better and more informed choices. A successful campaign requires people and organizations to communicate their proposed policies as clearly as possible to mobilize and empower voters to take action. This is why we need to give more tools and power to the parties, because modern democracy is party democracy, as what political scientist Lee Drutman said in his book, Breaking Up the Two-Party Doom Loop. Conventions will give parties just that. 6, it would also decrease government spending because party nominations will no longer be taxpayer funded, which forces political parties to self-finance their own political campaigns and party nominations. The cons of party conventions. 1, party conventions are less representative of the overall population. That is because only people who have been longtime members of a specific political party can only vote in their party's convention to decide who should be their party's nominee. Number 2, they may not represent the overall views of the citizens. 3, it would disenfranchise large swaths of our population, in part because most voters register as independents or no party preference voters, which means they can't. A lot of the times they can't vote in the Republican or Democratic primaries or Libertarian primaries. 4, it may become subservient to extreme ideologies while ignoring moderates. 5, interest groups manipulate the process before voters decide. 6, less open to the public. Overall, I believe conventions strike the balance. Party conventions strike the balance to ensure voters can organize effectively and efficiently to be the change that they want to see, to allow for alternative parties to form, reduces the influence of the state and the wealthy to interfere who is in the general election. Parties in the state can no longer interfere in another party's convention and lead to more original parties all competing in the general election. Parties can hold their convention at any time to nominate their candidates for any elected office in California. State party conventions is just one reform proposal that I would implement in replacement of the top two jungle primary system. The second reform proposal I also advocate for is fusion voting. Fusion voting is essentially what this means is fusion voting means that parties can nominate the same candidates, which allows voters to choose the party that better matches their values. So, for instance, Libertarians could nominate Republican candidates, and Greens can also nominate Democratic candidates if they want to. And Republicans can nominate Libertarians, or Democrats can nominate Green Party candidates. This allows for parties that may not have enough support to actually matter because they confuse with another party to still have some representation in government. This fusion voting, I advocate in establishing the use of fusion voting for all elections in the state of California. But I see fusion voting playing more of a role in single winner elections, in part because in single winner elections, only one person can win in those single winner elections, which means smaller parties that have very minimal support will not have any shot at getting elected 99% of the time. So this is why I allow for fusion voting, in which parties can nominate the same candidates, which in turn reduces vote splitting. And there are several elections in California that will, like with parliamentary with my ideas in parliamentary California, there would still be some single winner elections remaining intact. For one, the election for the lieutenant governor, because I keep the lieutenant governor directly elected, and also the two senators, the two U.S. senators will also be directly elected. Will also be directly elected. And as well, the U.S. House of Representatives and local elections will likely remain as single winner offices for now, at least. Here's a catch. I make local elections partisan offices, which means city councils, mayoral, county board of supervisors, and so forth will require candidates to show their party labels that they are registered as in the state, and also allow for parties to run conventions to nominate their own candidates. And with single winner elections, fusion voting becomes an utmost importance because, as I said earlier, it reduces vote splitting, and smaller parties can still have a voice in those elections by also playing a role in nominating a candidate from at least two of the big parties in California, which is currently the Democrats and Republicans. The third reform proposal that I also advocate for in Parliamentary California is to enlarge the size of the California State Assembly. And you all may be asking me, why should we enlarge the size of the California State Assembly? For one, California is one of the least representative democracy. Currently, an average state assembly member represents on average around 492,890 Californians. It's even worse for a state senator because an average state senator represents on average around 985,781 Californians. And with members of the legislature representing more people, this can make some people's votes worth more than other people's votes. It disrupts the fundamental principle of one person, one vote. And the 2024 election is a good example of that. 40% of Californians voted for the Republican Party to represent them in the state assembly, and yet the GOP took only 24% of the seats in the assembly, while 59% of Californians voted for the Democratic Party to represent them in the state assembly, and yet the DNC took 75% of the seats. This means the Democratic Party in California State Assembly is overrepresented, and the Republican Party is underrepresented in the state's lower house legislature. Number two, a larger assembly would enhance representation. Ordinary Californians would have better representation in the assembly, as individual assembly members will be more connected and held accountable by the voters, lead to more diverse viewpoints being represented. For instance, it would empower grassroots, local, people of color, women, and alternative leaders from third parties and people running as independent candidates to actually have a chance in getting elected to the assembly. This would reduce the power of the two major parties in the state, as it would reduce polarization and make coalition governance with other parties the norm. And on top of that, running for an election in a smaller district is also less expensive, which means third parties and independent candidates would have a better chance at getting elected because they don't have to because they can just campaign because they can campaign to fewer voters as possible to get elected in the assembly, which in turn lowers the barrier and threshold. Number three, this reduces the power of big money. And as I said earlier, running for an election in a smaller district election is less expensive, which reduces the influence of big money, encourages candidates and organizations to run more grassroots, retail-oriented campaigns. So these are the three big reasons why a bigger state assembly is necessary. 1. California is one of the least representative democracies. It's time that the Golden State becomes far more representative of ordinary Californians. Number 2, a larger assembly would enhance representation because elected assembly members would be far more connected to their constituents. Number 3, reduces the power of big money because it would dramatically reduce the financial barrier and threshold for ordinary grassroots people or grassroots organizers to get elected or elect their people in the assembly. This is why I propose enlarging the state assembly. Enlarge the state assembly from 80 members to 11,221 members. The state assembly is required by law every 10 years to increase or decrease its own delegation to account for population growth, to ensure that there is one assembly member for every 3,522 Californians. An absolute majority vote is required to alter the delegation size of the assembly. An absolute majority vote essentially means is the full membership of the state assembly in order to alter the delegation size of its own delegation, of its own membership size. I'm taking a lot of the one assembly member for every 3,522 Californians. I'm taking a lot of inspiration from New Hampshire State House of Representatives, where a single representative represents between 3,300 people to 3,500 people. And on top of that, John Cox, if you all remembered, he was the former gubernatorial candidate running for governor of California back in 2018. He ran against Gavin Newsom in both the primary and general election, and he made the top two. And I think it was back in 2015. I think it was either between 2015 to 2018. He proposed a ballot initiative or citizen initiated constitutional amendment, where he called it the Neighborhood Legislature Initiative, where it would create a California state legislature comprising over 12,000 members, where a single assembly member would represent around 5,000 Californians, and a single state senator would represent around 10,000 Californians. How this would work is that he would keep the current 80 assembly districts, but those 80 assembly districts would be further divided into smaller neighborhood districts where one assembly member would represent around 5,000 Californians. And the same is true for the 40 state Senate districts. Though you would still have your 40 state Senate districts under the Neighborhood Legislature Initiative, but in those 40 state Senate districts, they would be further divided into neighborhood districts where a single state senator would represent around 10,000 Californians. John Cox took a lot of inspiration from New Hampshire State House of Representatives, where it created a sense of citizen legislatures, and that's why he proposed it, to ultimately reduce the influence of big money and to ensure that lawmakers are representing ordinary people rather than special interest. So I'm taking a lot of inspiration from both New Hampshire State House of Representatives and also John Cox's Neighborhood Legislature Initiative. Enlarging the state assembly is the third reform proposal. Now we will talk about the fourth reform proposal, which is how would assembly members be elected? Members of the state assembly will be elected from 28 multi-member districts. The 11,221 assembly members are elected from 28 multi-member districts, with each district electing between 60 and 2,476 between 60 and 2,476. So to reiterate again, the 11,221 assembly members are elected from 28 multi-member districts, with each district electing between 60 and 2,476 members. As you see on this slide, you see what it could look like. You see in near the Redding area, which is part of Shasta County. It is located in the first assembly district. And as you see where Imperial County is, I'll get to that in a later part of the slide. That's comprised in the 25th district that elects 60 members. And you all may be asking me, what are multi-member districts? Multi-member districts. So instead of districts like we do currently, where districts only elect one person, in multi-member districts, districts would be able to elect multiple people. This is why multi-member districts would be districts in which multiple people can be elected to represent the same area. So going back to this slide again, in Los Angeles, there's one district that encompasses Los Angeles, and one person would not. Los Angeles would actually now have multiple assembly members representing the area. So it would help enhance representation for both Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, and Greens. And the same is true for an assembly member in a rural part of California as well, like such as Victorville, for instance, or Bakersfield, or Reading area. The idea of multi-member districts is that multi-member districts, districts allowing for multiple people to be elected from, allowing multiple people to represent the same area, would help in turn enhance representation for both the majority party in the district and also the minority party in the district. But here's a catch. Assembly members would be elected based on the principle from each of those. The members from each of those 28 multi-member districts would be elected on the basis of proportional representation. Proportional representation is defined as a system in which the number of votes a party gets determines how many seats they get in the legislature. For instance, if Party A gets 40% of the vote, they get 40% of the seats in the legislature. Party B gets 30% of the vote, so they get 30% of the seats, and so forth. Members from each of the 28 multi-member districts, or MMDs for short, would be elected proportionally based on the proportion of the vote that they got in any of the 28 multi-member districts. And there are many forms of proportional representation, which includes mixed member proportional, single transferable vote, rural-urban proportional, and so forth. But the proportional representation system I propose in Parliamentary California is open party list proportional representation. Open party list is essentially where voters, instead of voting for one candidate, they are voting for a group of candidates to represent them. Which means candidates, instead of running individually, they run as an entire group or run as an entire party. So instead of voting for one person per district, like we do now, in a party list system, each district will be bigger, and you would elect a group of assembly members in a way that closely reflects how people voted in that region. Open list means you can vote for one candidate and your vote will count for the candidate and the entire party. The more individual votes a candidate gets, the more likely they are to be in their party's group to get a seat in the assembly. So in open list systems, you're still voting. You are essentially voting for party, but you can still change the ordering of the party's list by voting for one candidate. And the more individual votes a candidate gets will make them far more likely that they would be in their party's group to get a seat in the state assembly. Here's an example of what an open party list proportional representation system would look like. And as you see, you have only one vote. The first step is to place an X in the box next to the name of your desired candidate. 2, your vote will count for the candidate and his or her party. So you have the Democratic, Republican Party, Reform Party, Working Families, and you have your independent writing list. And as you see here from this example, this voter voted for the Reform Party, but on the Reform Party's list, you had Friullo LaGuardia, Michael Bloomberg, Peter Vallone, Whitney Tilson, Fernando Fuhrer, and they all represent, and those candidates represent the Reform Party. And as you see here, this voter really liked Fiorello LaGuardia, which means his vote counted towards LaGuardia, but it also counted for the entire Reform Party. A vote for that candidate would make him would actually help him get elected in the assembly, because as I said earlier, the more individual votes a candidate gets on their party list will make them far more likely to be an elected assembly member. But as I said earlier, Fiorello LaGuardia's vote will still count as a vote for the entire Reform Party. The same is true for the Working Families Party. If someone voted for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as their candidate, that would count as a vote for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but it would also count as a vote for the entire Working Families Party, which in turn reduces vote splitting and also encourages intra-party unity, where candidates from the same party run together as if they have a common goal to get stuff done on behalf of their constituents. Here's a video from the Manhattan Institute further explaining open party list proportional representation. Here's the video, and I'll be right back.
Here are some key takeaways from my Manhattan Institute report, Reforming Big City Elections. Most big American cities are one-party towns with limited political competition that occurs as factions within the dominant party. Council members elected to their own small districts represent neighborhood concerns over the needs of the broader city, like housing. These factors lead to poorer governance. To address these issues, political scientist Jack Santucci and I suggest party list proportional representation for city council elections. Here's how it works. Parties nominate candidates, and voters can select the party's candidate, or both. Votes are collected across a wider geographic area than a single-seat district. Next, seats are allocated proportionately. If Party A earns 20% of the vote, it gets about 20% of the seats. The party's candidate with the most votes takes the first seat, and down the line. List PR systems promise to deliver more representative local government that better balances neighborhood and citywide needs.
As the Manhattan Institute, put it, an open party list proportional representation system, parties nominate candidates, and voters can vote for the party, can vote for the candidate, party, or both. And candidates and or parties are elected in proportion to their share of the vote. This would help greatly reduce one-party control in the state of California, because the minority party and smaller parties don't need the most or votes or majority of the votes to get elected. They only need a proportion, which means the threshold and barrier to get elected is far lower, which means you're allowing voters to vote their conscience, to truly vote for the party that better aligns with their values. And I'll give you an example in at least two multi-member districts from the 28 multi-member district from the 28 multi-member districts I shared previously in an earlier slide. So let's show you at least two examples. In the 28th multi-member district, this district encompasses the city of Los Angeles. Which encompasses Santa Monica, Glendale, Burbank, Pasadena, Inglewood, Long Beach. The 28th multi-member district, it elects 2,476 members proportionally. So a party would just need 0.14% of the vote, or need to garner 3,523 votes to qualify for a seat in this district. With only what this means is voters can truly vote their conscience in this district. They don't have to vote for the most popular party or candidate. They can truly vote for the party and candidate that better aligns with their values and their interests, because the barrier and threshold is lower, which means it's easier for smaller parties to get seats in the state assembly now. The 28th district, that's just one multi-member district. The other multi-member district would be the 25th multi-member district, as I explained earlier. The 28th multi-member district encompasses Imperial County, Ansa Borrego Desert State Park, and the Salton Sea. And it elects 60 members proportionally. It elects fewer members than the 28th district, but it is still, the threshold is still lower. A party in the 25th multi-member district would need 1.74% of the vote or obtain 3,495 votes to qualify for a seat in this district. Once again, the 28th and 25th district, the 28th and the 25th district would drastically lower the voter threshold for any party to get a seat in the legislature. Which means it is much easier for smaller parties to get seats. And since it is easier for them to get seats, voters are far more likely to vote their conscience and vote for the party and or candidate that better aligns with their values. All in all, these are my 5 proposals that will serve as my replacement alternatives to the top 2 jungle primary system that will indeed create a representative government in the Golden State. The first proposal is state party conventions, simply allowing longtime party delegates and party members to nominate their own candidates for the general election that will protect their party's agenda and party's platform, and also protect their own right to organize and mobilize their own constituents. Number 2, fusion voting. Fusion voting will simply allow smaller parties to still have a voice in the general election, who may not have enough support to win, but can still fuse with another party to still have some representation in the state government. Number 3, enlarge the state assembly from 80 members to 11,221 assembly members to ensure that there is one assembly member for every 3,522 people, to ensure that our state government is serving the needs of ordinary and working class Californians rather than special interest and the wealthy. Number 4, multi-member districts, where districts no longer just elect one person, but they also elect multiple people, so that every voter in each district has an assembly member or party that can represent their viewpoints, where the majority faction is represented, and also the minority faction is also represented in every district. Open party list proportional representation. Open party list proportional representation will help create a multi-party democracy in the state of California, because the barrier will be far lower and the threshold will be lower for smaller parties to get seats. And when this threshold is lower, it's easier for newer parties to gain seats in the assembly. And when it is easier, people are far more likelier to vote their conscience. Most of all, the five proposals include state party conventions, fusion voting, enlarging the state assembly, multi-member districts, and open party list proportional representation systems are all part of my ideas on how I would transform the state of California into a parliamentary democracy that will serve the wants and needs of the common folk, by the working class, and for everyday Californians.